We continue our journey around the vineyards of Occitanie, and now we've arrived in the southwest, and more specifically Cahors. Now Cahors is probably the most famous appellation in the southwest, known in former times as the black wine due to its deep, inky appearance and very fierce tannins. It's undergone a major transformation in the last 20 years. Situated on the Lot River, about 120 kilometers northwest of Toulouse, this is a region that stretches really to the west of the town of Cahors, along the banks of the river. Now the river Lot itself, which forms the backbone of the region, meanders rather than flowing in a straight line. So think Mosel rather than Tarn. This meandering of the river gives rise to different slopes, different aspects, different orientations, and explains in part the very varied styles of wine that we find in this region. In 2006, a study was undertaken to classify the vineyards of the region. The ultimate classification came up with 3 terrasses, those first terraces which are closest to the river, and then as you go up the slope you get to the second and the third terrace. So the nearer we are to the river, the more alluvial the soils. As we go further up the slope, the poorer they become. And then there's a bit of a gap before we get to the top of the slope, and the plateau, which is called the Cahors. We're at about 250 to 300 meters altitude. Here the soil is like the Kimmeridgian limestone, plus an iron-rich reddish clay called the siderolithic, very difficult to say, soil, which is really the main feature of this part of Cahors. The climate here is really a combination of Mediterranean and Atlantic. The further west we go, the more Atlantic we have, and the further east we are, we have more Mediterranean influences. The sun is quite prevalent, it's a warm region, and the rainfall is quite plentiful. We have 800 millimeters of rain a year. So it's an area really that is warmer than Bordeaux, but not as hot as the Languedoc. This is an appellation for red wine only, and the main grape variety here is Malbec. In fact, Malbec must be 70% of the total proportion of the wine. The other 2 varieties that are permitted are Merlot and Tannat. But in recent years, there's been a move away from these varieties, and you see a higher proportion of Malbec in the Cahors wines, sometimes up to 100%. It seems that Merlot in recent years has reached such high alcohol levels, and Tannat still doesn't ripen every year like it would do further south in Madiran, so people prefer to use the Malbec. This is really the only region in France that produces Malbec to any extent. It seems to thrive in the climate, not too hot, not too cold, adequate rainfall, and the varied soils. There are still the black wines, but these tend to be in the minority as they require such a long time before you can approach them. More recent developments have included earlier picking, shorter ferments, briefer macerations, and aging less time in wood. It is also common to see people aging wines in concrete, in large vats, and even in amphorae. The fascination of Cahors is the fact that you can make so many wines from one single grape variety. But I prefer to use maybe a quote from one of the famous domains here, Claude Trigadina. Jean Baldes, who is the owner, described Cahors as the Burgundy of the Southwest. Or if you want to use a jazz analogy, this is really the Miles Davis of the Southwest. The wine we're going to taste is Cuvée Morin from Domaine La Bellerangerie. This is an estate, a family-owned estate, quite an isolated area in the western part of Cahors, so one very much with a more Atlantic influence. This is a family-owned domain that was purchased in 1971. It was really a ruin at this stage, so they have completely replanted much of the vineyard. And this was actually the same year that actually AOC Cahors was created in 1971. And Morin himself, the owner, has been president of the syndicat twice, actually, in recent years. So this is a wine that is 100% Malbec. It comes from old vines, 45 years old, on the coast at the top part of the region, on the siderolithic soil. This is the iron-rich reddish clay overlaid by stones. The color is pretty intense. In fact, I can't really see through the glass. The nose is quite restrained, actually, but you've got a lot of this really deep, cherry character with a touch of that sort of slightly fire and brimstone, almost, shall we say, slightly volcanic edge coming from this iron-rich reddish soil. This is a full-bodied wine, but the structure is really quite tight. The tannins are quite firm. They're ripe, but they're really quite strident. You've got this beautiful streak of black fruit that's underpinning the wine. And then in the background, you've got this lovely backbone of acidity which is giving the freshness to this wine. And there's no real oak that's noticeable. It's really all about the fruit, but there is an underlying mineral character about this wine coming from this iron-rich soil, which gives it an extra layer of complexity. For those familiar with the Argentinian styles of Malbec, which are really very upfront, fruity and slightly softer tannins, this wine has all that intense fruit, but the structure is much tighter. You've got firmer tannins, quite grippy, and this beautiful underlying acidity. This is a wine that's already 6 years old and is just starting to open out. So this wine has great aging potential. It's very approachable now, but this is a wine that clearly is built for the longer term. Really lovely stuff. So this expression of effectively one grape variety that's grown on different soils, different orientations, different slopes, different altitudes, is probably the reason why Jean-Luc Baldès from Claude Trigadina calls Cahors the Burgundy of the Southwest.